Hello, this is Mary Middlestadt, and I'm here. I'm from Design and Be Merry, and I'm here today to show you a little bit about how to accomplish scatter beading. I had been hoping to get this video done for some time, and so hopefully those of you who are interested in adding a little spark to your wool work and stitching or quilting, this will be a helpful video. I call this scatter beading. It's these isolated single beads that are sewn in. They'd be a real pain to sew if you did each one individually, and I have developed a technique over the years that I think will suit you well. Here are some of the other effects. You can obviously use them and include some extra stitchery pieces, not unlike here. And obviously they're spaced about a ½ inch apart. They can certainly add, different beads can add a little spark of color and make for a magical snow, or just fun accents along the way to make your wool work stand out and be a little different. First of all, like in most of my videos, I'll talk a little bit about quick review of materials. I do have talk about this in other videos. The first thing that we are going to use is Japanese beads is what I recommend. Japanese beads have a larger hole and a bigger box. If you take a look at the beads right here, you'll see that they're boxier shape. They have a large hole, which is much different than the check beads, which I have here. And you can see that they are much more irregular, and excuse me, here they got a little bit messed up, and they are more donut shaped, and you can see they have a smaller hole. They have their purpose, but unless you're an experienced beader, you probably want to stick with the Japanese ones. And here is, this one is the size 11 beads, and again you can see the very large hole. So those of you who have had difficulties in the past, it may be that you just simply didn't have the right supplies. And last but not least, you can also scatter bead with bugles. I'll do a little bit of that because they make wonderful pieces for little flower centerpieces and fun stuff. You could use them on cookies for imitating pearls or whatever, ornaments, make them look Christmassy. However, you just need to know that when you sew these down, the edges may be a little sharper, so usually you can scatter bead them, but you may want to put a seed bead on each side. Probably not so much for the small ones, but for the large ones. Anyways, it's an option in terms of the seed beads. As far as thread, I am using, most of the thread that I use, let's get this back down here, is the Color Fast. All of their thread is very color fast, is Valdani size 12. And I really like using their pearl cotton. It works well, and it fits through the Jenna Kimball size 9 needle. You cannot use this if you choose to use a beading needle. Excuse me. And so that's certainly up to you, but this is nice because for those of you who don't live near a place where it's easy to get some of these supplies, or simply don't want to increase your stash of miscellaneous supplies, you can use the same thing that you're using to stitch together your wool work. The other thread is a bead called Silamide. It comes on these cards, and it is an actual beading thread. It's a very strong beading thread, and you don't need a lot. These are about 100 yards. One is 40 yards. You just need a couple of neutral colors, maybe a neutral brown, a neutral gray, a white. You can even stain it with permanent marker pen and let it sit for a while if you want it to blend in. It does come on a spool, but I suspect most of you don't need 900 yards. Unless you already have it. It's a very strong thread and very well working. If you don't have access to this, you can check regular sewing threads if you may have a strong nylon thread that's extremely strong and does not break. I will show you one thread I do not recommend for this, and that is the commonly known thread called Nymo. It's a monofilament thread. It'll usually have a letter or a 0. It can have up to 3 zeros, or a letter A, B, C, D, E. That's a sizing. Unfortunately, this thread seems to stretch and give, and it is not nearly as strong. You can break it with your hands. And so I would not recommend it for the back. Plus, I don't think it stands up to the ironing and heating and steaming that you may be doing with your wool, especially since we use fusible. So that's something I wouldn't use. I will show you both threads today and how to use them, how you may want to use them. Let's see, what else? You can do this on any wool. It's usually done before you attach the back. And almost always there's fusible. And I lost my piece of paper here, obviously. This was paperback fusible. You can see the shine. The fusible will keep your wool in place, intact. It won't stretch. And it allows you to go from bead to bead without a lot of problems. Now, I'll show you ahead of time so that you're not mortified when it happens, is when you stitch, sometimes that fusible gets broken up a little bit and it cracks. There is not a problem. It will, when you fuse the back on, the iron will heat it again and it will melt just fine. And the plus side is that it will trap all the extra thread ends in between. So don't be alarmed if that happens. It's a little bit of adjustment to stitch with fusible on the back, but it also is extremely durable. It is a little stiffer, so if that's an issue, you may have to work out something, but it certainly keeps it very nice. I use it on almost all my mats. Okay, let's get down to business here. I'm going to start with I'm going to start with the, I guess I didn't do needles. Okay, excuse me. The needle I'm using is a Jenna Kimball, size 9, red work, and I like her needles because they are long, slender, very sharp, and they go through fusible. I never have problems with, I hear people talk about sticking and that type of thing. I use those, and the beading needles, the most common ones are like John James. I use a size 10 long. They're a long, slender needle. Just remember, if you are going to use the pearl cotton, you need to use a Jenna Kimball needle, or perhaps you might want to try one from your sewing. However, one of the things with the Jenna Kimball is that the head is not wider, and some needles are constructed for that. So I really enjoy using her needles, and I've never had any problem. Okay, scatter beading. Tie a nice big knot on the back, come up through the wool, and this would probably be a bigger knot than you normally would run into because you want it to, especially with loose woven. The fusible will help a certain amount. You will pick up a bead, and I'm doing this with size 11, and also choose a color thread that matches the wool thread, the wool background. That way it will blend in. Go back down and you will come back up, and now that I've shown you quickly how it does, let's do it a little bit slower. Okay, so we're going to come up about a ½ inch away from the other one. Now if you pull real tight it would tuck, but that the little rubbery feeling that you get from having the fusible is makes a difference. And if I didn't mention, it's Heat and Bond Light is what I use. Is you come up and you're going to grab a bead, and because of that nice boxy shape, you're going to go down about a 32nd, or the width of the bead, from where you came up. If you put a needle in, you can get it to lay real nice by just tugging at it while the needle lays in there to hold the bead very nice and straight. If you use beads that are check, they may flop all over. Come up and go through again. And once more, come up, bring up the needle. I think you'll agree that there's nothing really difficult about this. You're going to go down, and if you want to straighten it like this, you're going to come up again. You're going to go through the same bead, same way. And we'll do one more here. And you'll notice what the back looks like. You're just crisscrossing, but you're not pulling tight, but you're able to do it snugly. The fusible makes all the difference in the world for this. I know some quilters use beads, but many of them sew the beads on after they've done the quilting, and that's a little bit different. With wool, You can obviously put it on and sew it. And there are other interfacings you could try if you want a softer, say for a garment where it needs to drape. But for most of the table mats or the wall pieces that we do, this certainly works. Once you have this done, what you're going to do is about every 3 or 4 beads, you're going to just tie one simple knot on the back. And that prevents, in the unlikely situation where for some reason the beads get lost or would break, excuse me, the thread might break or would get broken, you wouldn't lose all the beads. And then you just continue on scattering your beads around. I find one of the things that I have to fight is if you're doing scatter beading, try and be free enough to just kind of do it randomly. It's hard sometimes for those of us who are design orientated to do things randomly, but it makes for a wonderful look, and nobody will know how you had done it. So, and as you can see, it really doesn't take that much time. I will confess, I have done it where I have not gone through each bead twice. I have simply done it once. That's not been a big issue, but they do sit nicer when you do it twice. So I guess it depends upon how patient you are. When you're done, you simply tie a knot, and I slide my needle in between the fusible. Doesn't show on the front, but I just slide it in between the fusible about a 1/4 inch away and just trim it. You don't have to trim real close because all that's going to get fused down. Now, I will also show you a little bit about the same process. It's the exact same process, but doing it with the beaded needle. And again, this time be sure and wind a good knot and make a good glumpy knot on the end of your thing, because the beading thread is thinner, and some wools, particularly depending upon the weave, it can go right through. And you don't want it popping out after the fact. But again, you're going to do the same thing. Now you'll notice that my thread matches the background very closely, and you will not see any color at all. With the pearl cotton, you might see just a tiny bit. Again, remember to choose your thread not by the color of the bead, but by the color of the fabric. You can see little tiny bits of color, but they hardly show up because the beads kind of sink into the wool, especially once you press them. They will go. And you do the same thing. You go from one, oops, okay, I lost that bead. Go from one to the other. This bead's a little skinnier. Oops, excuse me here, get it back in the, where you can see it. Okay. I got a little dilemma here. Let me remove. I could pull the needle out, but I'm being really lazy. And if you pull really hard, a lot of times you can undo a spot without taking the needle out. I guess that says I've done it a lot over time. But anyways, so we did that. I'll do one more, and then I'll show you how to scatter bead the bugles, which is not really a whole lot different, but it's a nice thing to know. Gives you options. These are all things that you can choose to include. Again, you tie a knot, and you can just keep on sewing if you want. Now, if I were going to do a bugle, and we got, I'll do a short bugle here. You see I picked up a bugle bead, and you kind of have to estimate how far that bugle bead is, and that's how far apart you go down. And again, you use a color of thread that matches the thing. Now with a beading, bugles for some reason tend to run a little bit narrower, so you may not get through twice with the pearl cotton, but with beading thread you certainly can. And there you have your nice little piece. Now, the little ones usually aren't too stressed, but when you get your bigger ones, let's see, I guess I gotta come up here through the big one, but if you've got a big one, you're covering a larger area. And depending upon how tight you pull down, and depending upon what the purpose, obviously people who wear these, they, you know, on a jacket or coat, you see them break easy because they're wearing them and they get worn. Obviously, if this is hanging on the wall, it's never going to be worn. It's not a problem. But something you can do to help, particularly if you're using check bugles, if you don't have these bugles, is to put a little seed bead on each end, or possibly one end of the bugle. Now I have opposite colors. You would probably use a black bead with the black bugle, and that would be fine. You know, I guess you could use it for decor to have a different color if you wanted to. They make neat little flower pistils. You could have a long stem with just one color on it. But again, kind of a isolated singular method where it's something that you might scatter around. And you just couch down in between the bugle and the bead, and that'll keep the thread from coming out of the end there and being forced against the edge in which it might wear and eventually stop. Anyways, I hope these hints will enhance your arsenal of things that you like to do in your wool work, and that you can improve. Again, you knot the back here. I'm going to slide that in between. Trim it, and there you go. You have your samples of scatter beading, and it goes as fast, if not faster, than French knots. But like I said, hopefully you will add this to your arsenal of fun things to do with your wool. You have a great day, and go have some stitching time. And if you want to see more of my work, just go to www.designandbemerry.com. Thank you for viewing. Have a good day.